Sony just did it again. This is the new Sony 50-150 f2 G Master lens. That's right, you heard me right. They made another f2 constant aperture zoom lens. I've had this lens for about 2 weeks now, and I've used it for event photos, I've shot a dozen portrait sessions, and I even took it with me to shoot some landscapes. And I'm conflicted on whether or not I want to spend maybe up to $3,900 to own this lens myself. So in today's video, we're gonna take a look at a bunch of sample photos and videos, some technical tests just to see how well this lens performs, especially against some of the prime lenses it competes with, like the 50mm f1.4 G Master, 85mm f1.4 G Master Mark II, and the 135mm f1.8 G Master. We're gonna talk about its build quality and ultimately talk about whether or not this lens should be in your shopping cart if you shoot a lot of portraits. And as somebody who shoots a lot of portraits, I have a lot of opinions on this lens. Sony finally caught up to Canon last year with the release of the 28-70 f2 G Master lens, and that's been my go-to lens for photo and video for about 95% of what I shoot. It literally lives on my a7S III and on my a7C Mark II. And now they're spoiling us with the world's first 50-150 f2 constant aperture zoom lens. The photos I've been getting have had this fantastic mixture of clean and sharp results in the focus area and almost like painterly results in the autofocus areas, which end up creating really stunning portrait photos. And when I was shooting videos on this lens, I got that same energy and I was just loving the visuals I was getting. Now, Sony hasn't told me exactly how much this lens is gonna cost yet, but they've told me it's gonna be somewhere between $3,499 and $3,899. Obviously, I hope that it's on the lower end of that price range, but for what you're getting from this lens, I wouldn't be surprised if they were pricing it closer to that top end. But with that pricing in mind, I had a gnawing question. Would I rather have multiple primes like the 50mm f1.4, the 85 f1.4 Mark II, and the 135 f1.8, which would cost me a whopping total of about $5,200, or would I just rather have this 50-150 instead for less money? Going off just the real world test photos I've gotten with the 50-150, I F with this lens heavy. But to answer whether or not this is the best portrait lens for Sony cameras right now, we're gonna have to do a bit more technical testing. As usual, let's start off with test charts to see how sharp this lens is. Right off the bat, center sharpness is really good. Wide open at f2, centers look really crispy, and if you look into the corners, you'll see that they're a hair soft, but plenty sharp for shooting portraits and tight compositions. As usual, stopping down makes this lens even sharper, and I found that f5.6 was the sharpest aperture on this lens. Here's where it gets really interesting. I took a bunch of test photos side by side with the prime lenses that this lens directly competes against, and it's surprising how close the results were. Starting with the 50mm f1.4 G Master, with both lenses opened up to f2, I would say that the new 50-150 is pretty close in performance. In the centers, I'd say it's basically just as sharp as the 50mm prime, just a little bit less sharp. If you look into the corners, I'd say it's definitely softer, but not a significant degree of a difference. When you look at the 85mm f1.4 G Master Mark II, you'll see that the same story plays out, with the 50-150 being just about as sharp in the centers while being slightly softer in the corners. And again, with the 135mm f1.8 G Master, same story here, with the centers being completely sharp while the 50-150 is again slightly softer in the corners. But this is fascinating to me. Yes, while the dedicated prime lenses objectively are sharper centers and corners, the fact that this is a zoom lens, constant aperture of f2, is able to basically keep up with dedicated prime lenses, that's an incredible feat. Bokeh from this lens is also really nice, and if anything, it almost looks painterly. I don't know how to describe it, but the way the autofocus areas render on this lens just look really nice in my opinion. And at f2, even zoomed out at 50mm, you still get good subject separation. And of course, when you zoom into 150mm all the way at the tight end, you get great subject separation thanks to all of that telephoto compression. Next, let's talk about lens flares. It's one of those reliable things that Sony has basically nailed on all of their G Master lenses. Wide open at f2, we get a small amount of flaring, but it's pretty consistent in terms of its colors and manages to prevent the lens flares from washing out the image. Instead, it maintains contrast quite well. There is, however, a minor amount of ghosting, also known as trailing flares, but overall the lens flares from this lens is appealing and clean. Next, let's take a look at the artifacts produced by this lens and how this lens handles it, starting with chromatic aberration. The Sony 50-150 shows more CA than other contemporary G Master lenses. Wide open at f2, we see that there is a pretty minor amount of chromatic aberration in the autofocus areas, but to my surprise, even as we stop down at f2, it's still noticeable, and even at f4, it's still noticeable, though in real-world scenarios, I haven't really seen this come into play. What about lens distortions? There's definitely some barrel distortion happening when looking at just the physical results right out of the camera, which does concern me if you don't like barrel distortion and you plan on using this lens to shoot videos. Because for photos, we can correct it pretty easily using lens correction profiles, but for videos, this can be a lot more complicated of a task. It's not the most noticeable distortion, and it's especially well hidden when you're far away from a scene, but if you're shooting up close with it, you may notice it. Vignetting is also pretty prevalent in this lens when shooting wide open at f2, and if anything might be the biggest flaw I see in this lens. The moment you stop down at f2.8 though, that vignetting is basically completely gone. Vignetting in a lens typically isn't something that I'm super concerned about, but if you're picking this lens up for shooting portraits, you're probably going to be shooting wide open at f2 pretty often, so you will be dealing with that vignetting quite frequently. So that's definitely something to be thinking about. Next, let's take a quick look at autofocus. Not surprisingly, with 4 XD autofocus motors in this lens, the autofocus performance is really snappy. With my a7S III set to default focus speeds, the lens does a fantastic job of keeping up with my movements towards and away from the camera, both while walking and running. And the same was true for photos as well. I didn't get extremely in-depth with this testing, but I basically had a 99% hit rate, and I imagine if I took this lens to shoot some indoor sports, it would be able to keep up with, if not outperform, most of the dedicated primes that are in this lens's focal range. Oh, and side note, Sony's really crushing the game with their focus breathing compensation in all of their new lenses because there really is like none in this lens. All right, now let's take a look at the build quality. Let me start off by saying that this lens strikes a pretty good balance between size and weight distribution. When paired with a full-size Sony camera body like the Sony a7R5, it's actually a really comfortable setup to shoot with and even carry around with you. For reference, it's the same height as the 70-200 G Master Mark II, but a little thicker than it. It also weighs around 1.3 kilograms or just shy of 3 pounds, which makes it lighter than the original 70-200 G Master, but heavier than the new Mark II version of that lens. On the lens itself, you'll find the usual Sony G Master lens design language with a focus, zoom, and even an aperture ring. You'll also find a switch to toggle between autofocus and manual focus, a switch to toggle on and off full-time direct manual focus, an aperture click-declick switch, and an iris lock switch. You'll also find not 2, but 3 custom programmable buttons as well. On the front of the lens, you'll find that beautiful piece of glass with 19 optical elements with an 11 blade aperture that's responsible for the awesome image quality coming from this lens. Similar to the 28-70 f2 G Master though, you're probably going to have a pretty hard time finding a new set of filters that's going to fit this enormous 95mm front filter thread. And of course, on the mount side, there's a rubber gasket for weather sealing. Overall, the build quality and design of this new 50-150 is fantastic. We love that high quality build quality that comes with these white labeled telephoto zoom lenses from Sony. The optics are absolutely incredible, and the autofocus motors in here make it super snappy, and really there's just no complaints about this at all. Before we move on to my conclusion, let's talk about pricing and availability. If you're interested in checking out the Sony 50-150 f2 G Master lens, I believe pre-orders should be starting this week, and they'll be shipping out at the end of May. I'll have links in the description down below on where you can find more information on this new lens. As for pricing, Sony actually hasn't gotten back to me yet on what the final price is going to be once this lens is launched. They just gave me a range, and it's going to be somewhere between $3,499 to $3,899, which is very pricey. So let's talk about what I think of this lens. Like I said in my video on the 28-70 f2 zoom lens, the difference between f2 and something like f1.4 is definitely noticeable, but I don't feel like it's that important. For the purposes of background separation, at 50+mm, you start benefiting from compression, the effect where the background gets larger compared to your subject, making them stand out pretty easily. So even though you can't get as wide open as a dedicated prime, you're still getting tons of subject separation. For the purposes of letting in more light, yes, f2 and f1.4 is a difference of one stop of light, which is a lot, but for photos, you have the flexibility of recovering a lot of details by shooting in RAW, and for videos, if you're shooting on an A7S III adjacent sensor, you get that dual base ISO at 12,800 ISO, so you're pretty much good there as well. So for me, those aren't going to be the deciding factors between whether or not I'd be interested in picking up this lens over some dedicated primes. Instead, the biggest determining factor in my mind is going to be the fact that the dedicated primes are definitely sharper and also smaller and lighter. And for me, it really boils down to, do you want to carry around multiple prime lenses that are slightly sharper, so meaning you have to bring a camera bag or maybe a big camera sling, or do you want to just rock one singular zoom lens that covers 50-150mm, which is perfect for portraits and opens as wide as f2, which is really as wide as I need for portrait work. Because for the purposes of photos, the 50-150 does everything I need it to do. And here's what I find really interesting. If you don't own any of the dedicated primes yet, and you don't own this zoom yet, and you're deciding between the two, the price of 3 dedicated primes, the 50, the 85, and the 135, comes out to be around a little over $5,000, whereas this zoom lens comes out to be just under $4,000, which actually makes it the cheaper alternative. Now, personally, the one argument that I have for the prime lenses is because I'm a video shooter, so I already rock pretty big camera rigs, and I don't really like the idea of handheld holding my A7S III camera rig with the 50-150 lens attached to it, because it just makes it really unwieldy, whereas with like the 50mm, it's super compact and they're small enough to fly on a gimbal. I mean, I'm sure you could mount the 50-150 on a gimbal and get it to work, but the real question is, do you want to make it work? Because that's going to be a really heavy rig, and I personally wouldn't want to use that all day long. So when it comes to video work, it's a lot easier for me to be like, no, I'll just stick with my primes. I don't need the zoom. But let me tell you, after shooting a dozen portrait sessions with the 50-150, it was just a blissful experience. No lens swapping. I can just basically shoot a nice 50mm normal portrait shot. And then I'm like, wait, that background looks really cool. Let me compress it. I'll take like 10 steps back, zoom into 150 and get a completely different looking shot. It was both efficient and also allowed me to be super creative. So when I have my clients for their 1-hour photo sessions, I can do a lot more for them and produce more interesting images for them in less time. So if you're somebody who primarily shoots portraits and primarily shoots photos, I would highly recommend you at least check this lens out. Like, once this lens is available and out there at the rental houses, I highly recommend renting this lens for like a weekend and go shoot some of your client sessions with it, because I promise you, you're gonna absolutely love it. Now, if you're a hybrid shooter or just a straight up video shooter, you're gonna be in a similar boat to me, where you're trying to figure out, well, I mean, just because I get the 50-150 doesn't mean it's a one and done. I still might need the primes for flying it on a gimbal or setting it up on a certain rig. So that is going to be a harder decision than if you were just a portrait photographer. Personally, I may end up buying this lens. I know Annette's not going to like hearing the fact that I might be buying another $4,000 lens, but it's that good of a lens. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see more content covering the latest Sony Alpha camera gear news, make sure to get subscribed and let me know in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of this 50-150 f2 constant zoom G Master lens? Is this a lens that you want to pick up? Is the price just too high? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm super curious. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Peace.